Good evening. Here is the news on Friday, the 27th of Geldof. Archaeologists near Mount Sinai have discovered what is believed to be a missing page from the Bible. The page is presently being carbon dated in Bonn. If genuine, it belongs at the beginning of the Bible and is believed to read, "To my darling Candy, all characters portrayed within this book are fictitious and any resemblance to persons living or dead is purely coincidental." The page has been universally condemned by church leaders.
This is another Fox News alert. Moments ago, Alabama Governor Kay Ivey signed one of the strictest abortion bills in the country into law. Correspondent Jonathan Serra reports on the firestorm ignited on both sides of this debate, one that could very well lead all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court.
The Republican-controlled state Senate voted 25-6 to make it a Class A felony for doctors to perform abortions in Alabama unless the mother's life is in danger. The measure makes no exceptions for cases involving rape or incest.
Life is a gift of our Creator, and we must do everything that we can to protect life.
Outrage from state and national Democrats soon followed.
I apologize to the women of Alabama for this archaic law that we passed.
We need to lift up their voices. We need to lift up the voices of women and families across America who see their civil rights and human rights being taken away from them.
Democratic presidential candidate Kirsten Gillibrand plans to speak tomorrow at a women's rally in Georgia, where Republican Governor Brian Kemp signed a similar bill last week. The Georgia law has sparked calls for a boycott by the state's $2 billion film industry that supports nearly 1 million jobs. Actress and activist Alyssa Milano called for a national sex strike, tweeting, "Until women have legal control over their own bodies, we just cannot risk pregnancy. Join me by not having sex until we get bodily autonomy back."
Didn't even make a motion.
The debate over Alabama's bill has been fierce. Last week, the gloves were off when a shouting match on the Senate floor delayed a vote. The legislation will likely face an immediate legal challenge.
It's designed in every way to do just that. That's why we were trying to keep it just as it was to address the issue that Roe versus Wade was decided on, which is that baby in the womb a person.
Supporters say they want the case to be taken up by the U.S. Supreme Court. As the makeup of the High Court becomes increasingly conservative, the chances of overturning Roe v. Wade become increasingly possible. Brett?
Jonathan, thank you. More on this with the panel.
So welcome back to the Angry Scotland podcast. If you're new to us, you can follow us on Twitter at Angry Scotland, and you can also find our Facebook page, facebook.com/Angry Scotland. And we would love to hear your feedback, particularly on this week's episode, as we're going to be discussing the abortion laws in Alabama. So Tucker, do you want to give us a quick rundown on what's happened in the United States?
So it's worth us understanding what's going on over there. The right wing in America have been going after abortion rights for fucking ever. The constitutional right to an abortion in America was established under the constitutional right to privacy, which they have. And that was the Roe versus Wade ruling, that a woman has a right to privacy and an abortion is covered. Basically, her medical privacy means that the state cannot make her carry a child. Now, rather than try and take a sledgehammer to Roe v. Wade, what the right has done is incrementally chip away at it. Clinics have been targeted by legislation, and predominantly, obviously, the southern states. They'll be targeted for legislation that will make the requirements for their operation more and more onerous. So, for instance, they'll pass legislation that makes the length of space that they've got to have between, like the front door and the internal rooms or something like that will be very, very specified, so that there will be no buildings that they can actually buy that will satisfy the requirements, or they'll make it so that they have to have admitting privileges to a local hospital. Now, in practical terms, if there was an emergency, if something went wrong, they'd be admitted anyway, and, the American equivalent of the A&E in their emergency rooms. But they'll make it so that they've got to have a contract with the local hospital, which means they've got to satisfy requirements at this massive hospital standards in order to be able to have that, or they can't operate. So what happens then is that little by little, the businesses offering these services close because they just can't meet the requirements, which means the provision of abortion becomes more and more scarce. So you end up with a situation where there's maybe only like a couple of clinics in the whole state. And when you think about the fact that, any one of the states can be nearly the size of England, can you imagine if, you lived in Glasgow and you needed an abortion, so you had to go to Inverness? A woman that needs an abortion, particularly if she's poor and she works full time, she's going to have to take time off work. She's going to have to pay for a hotel, transport. She's going to have to take 2-3 days. It's not something that you can do discreetly all of a sudden, because you're going to have to take a few days off to go and just fucking do it. And then there'll be laws that, for instance, a woman won't be able to just turn up and get that done. She'll have to be seen by the clinic and then have to come back 2 days later. So you've then got to spend 3 or 4 days wherever it is you've got to go to have it done. All of these things ought to be technically unconstitutional, but what's happened is all of these cases have been going to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court has, for the most part, been upholding those laws, which means that the provision of abortion has been getting slimmer and slimmer and slimmer in the more right-wing southern states of America. So little by little, you chisel away at these rights. Salami tactics, basically, to steal a line from Yes Prime Minister. Slicing away until all of the sausage is gone has been the tactic that they've been taking to get rid of abortion. But that has been their aim, to get rid of the constitutional right to abortion.
So, to bring it closer to home, Northern Ireland has even worse positions on this issue.
Some people pointed
Alabama.
out the fact that, a lot of British activists have spent more time talking about Alabama than they have done about Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
So do you want to chat up our listeners on what the whole situation in Northern Ireland really is? Because
you can't have an abortion, and Irish girls come across to the UK mainland to get an abortion if they need one. So Irish women in Northern Ireland are in exactly that position.
So how has that gone under the radar for so long?
Because the English don't give a fuck about the provinces.
People probably assume that, the UK, most of our laws are the same. I don't think they actually appreciate Northern Ireland as like a wee world in and of itself.
Absolutely in and of itself.
I guess it's kind of getting into the debate about how much power should be devolved, and like when it's used for something bad, does that then say, well, maybe devolution's bad, maybe we should start centralising things? And it's like, when do you override the will of a group of people when it's against something you think is right? And I think that also in America, this is a big issue, because they're very constrained by the Supreme Court and federal law, but they have this kind of idea that the state should be kind of supreme and have their own
states' rights.
Yeah. So I kind of wonder if it would be better for them if they did have more freedom, like the states could, the states who are more liberal could, ban, machine guns and stuff like that, and the states which want to ban abortion could do that. And you can debate about whether these are bad or good, but the freedom of people to decide what they want to do within their own region, isn't that important and better than having a Supreme Court saying, this is the law, everyone in this 100 million people must abide by this same law?
You wonder if eventually the world will become like the internet in real life, in that you'll just move to the region or area that suits your beliefs and lifestyle. So if I'm liberal, there'll be places where I can go and be around people who also think like that. But if I'm a devout Christian or a devout Muslim or whatever, I can go to a different region where those beliefs are represented.
I'm kind of optimistic in that I feel that if you do it that way, these places will shrink and shrivel into nothing. Because I think humanity is essentially heading in a more liberal direction everywhere.
Yeah.
People are becoming more and more free to do what they want and live the life that they want, as long as they're not hurting anyone else. Because it's such a better way to live. It's I
totally agree.
Such a nicer way to live your life.
Doing everything you want, as long as you're not hurting someone else and things are done with consent. That, I totally agree with that. Broad strokes across the board seems to be slowly, and I do stress, slowly where we're all going. But there is the arseholes amongst us.
Yep.
Cite Tucker's law of 15% of any given population will be arseholes. So I think the problem that you're in is that you have to have an Alabama. Do you not create regions where that can exist? Is it right for a centralised point of power to override on a small...
The harder question for us, is like Northern Ireland. Does Westminster have the right to dictate to the Northern Irish people what their law should be regarding things?
No, I mean, Westminster doesn't have... If it's a devolved issue, it's a devolved issue. No, we don't have the right to... But we do have the right to talk about it and tell them that they're being arseholes.
Absolutely, yes.
As with Alabama. Alabama is a federal state of the United States. It has to abide by the agreed constitution. I'm perfectly in favour. If Alabama wanted to secede, it could do whatever the fuck it wants. But until it does that, it has to abide by the law that it agrees to, in much the same way that, unfortunately, Scotland, having not voted to become independent, is currently stuck with being part of the United Kingdom.
So if we're all getting very gobby about Northern Ireland and Alabama and so forth, should we not also be getting really gobby about the Middle East and Africa?
Yes.
Right. So
that's another show entirely, isn't it?
Well, this is what I mean. It's just I think that's something that you said earlier on. Like all these people in Britain that are fucking going off their nut about what's happening in Alabama, even though on their very doorstep in Northern Ireland, a far worse version of this issue is playing out.
Yeah.
And I think this is it's very odd to me sometimes where we get selective about these kind of issues depending on their geographical location.
People just don't.
Yeah, well, I think that's, and also I think there probably is a political correctness issue going on here where I think it's okay to go like, well, look at these fucking rednecks in Alabama, dumb Christian motherfuckers. We can say that. But if we actually go, look at these stupid Muslims in the fucking Middle East, like suddenly that's really bad. Even though like they're doing the exact same fucking thing. I mean it is, but I think that's, in my head, I don't know if it should be a problematic statement. I think that I should be able to say that religious beliefs are bollocks, regardless of the belief system.
And the thing is that to not pick on Islam in particular, because it's no more mental than any other religion.
But I think
they're all fucking mental.
So the abortion issue, it's bad everywhere, and it should be called out for being shitty no matter where we're at. The only moral quandary I think we have with this is, if religious views are to be respected, how do we play that out in terms of legislation?
Why should religious views be respected?
Well, I wouldn't use the word respected, more tolerated.
Tolerated. But like in Scotland, we pride ourselves on our inclusivity of religion and so forth.
To believe in whatever fucking thing you want. But it doesn't make it true, and you shouldn't be entitled to any special treatment. I mean, I'd fucking get rid of all integration of religions with fucking schools and all sorts. They can all.
I would totally agree with that. That's going to offend so many people that are out there now.
I don't care.
That whole thing in England where there's Muslim communities protesting against like same-sex marriage stuff being taught in their schools is kind of interesting, and that's exactly what we've been talking about. That whole quandary that you've got of how do you deal with this stuff? These like two things like mashing up against each other. Like how do you tolerate people who have terrible views? At the same time, you don't want to like steamroller over them. Probably because come from a Scottish Presbyterian background. I'm always of the opinion that if you start to have like a different opinion from folk, you leave and you start your own church or your own thing, and like you just keep breaking down into smaller and smaller units, and then it's just a matter of competition.
Sand all along the beach.
And it's just like you left complaining about that one thing that you're really.
Where's the popular front of Judea? He's over there.
Yeah. This is why I can't understand why like Scottish Protestants tend to be unionists, because like the whole thing about Protestantism and Presbyterianism in particular is like you have like different areas, you don't agree with each other, you break off into a smaller unit, you do your own thing. That's like the whole basis of that religion, and like they don't seem to understand it when it comes to like a state. Scotland should do exactly the same thing.
It's all Henry VIII's
mind.
fault, and that was just because he wanted out of his marriage.
There's loads of things that I've read into about this, about how like even the modern understanding of what Satan and the devil is was completely created by the Catholic Church. And there's apparently in the Vatican vaults, there is like the original non-rebooted versions of the Bible, which included things like female equality and things like this, because there is historical evidence to suggest that women were kind of on par with the blokes until a certain point, and then they got
there's a whole load of other gospels.
Yes, they were all good. They were all cancelled.
Some of them were written by they were all cancelled.
They were all cancelled.
There were gospels written by
Sort
women.
of jokes in them. That's rubbish.
Away it goes.
They picked four.
Basically, what the
I'm waiting for the graphic novel version.
The Catholic Church, did it like a kind of George Lucas on their own religion. Effectively, they went back into it and like re-edited it and added in like bad CGI and bad text.
Well,
hand shot first, but like with Christ.
The Roman Empire.
I've had this working theory for a while now that in the future, when we're all buzzing about on the spaceships, that they will actually come up with a term with it. We have like ancient history now, and like we've got these kind of brackets for how we describe certain eras, and I think there's going to be like the post-internet history where we actually have a universal, this is actually what happened. So if I want to know like what happened on September 11th, even if I'm in the year like 2362, I'll be able to go, computer, tell me what happened in the year 2001 on September 11th. And it will come up with all the live footage, all the actual, news stories as they broke on the internet. Whereas, back even like in the Kennedy assassination, we're purely relying
on the few sources and
right.
scraps.
And I think that like there's going to be there will be a term for it eventually, where there's going to be this like, no, here's what actually happened, and then there's this kind of like fictionalized.
But even that is going to be a matter of reportage, because a friend of mine says when anything major happens, especially if it sort of happens in the evening, he likes to stay up into the night watching the news as long as possible, he says, because you get bits and pieces of stuff coming in real time before anybody's tidied the story up, and by the next day that's all gone.
That's what did happen in 9/11. All the discussions of secondary explosions that these fucking conspiracy theorists, always pine back to. There's all those like Fox News presenters and CNN guys, all there going like, it sounded like there were bombs in the building. It looked like a controlled demolition. It's secondary explosion, and like all these quotes that definitely happened.
Building
on the day.
9 and like
Building 7
on top of a rooftop somewhere looking on it. It's all rubbish.
The Building 7 thing is that
it's all rubbish.
Yeah, but there is another building that wasn't one of the two towers that went down on the same day.
That's Building 7, but it is all rubbish. They have thing is now
there is a I understand a completely sensible explanation for why it happened.
Well, the thing that I've seen, one is that fucking the jet fuel doesn't melt steel beams argument, where there's this great guy in America that basically just explained the idea.
Have we done a controlled experiment on that?
Well, this guy, he more or less did. Basically, what he was saying is it doesn't melt. But he took a blowtorch to metal and just went, look, it's still pointing up the way. So he put it in like a lock. So you got one of those like workbenches with those locks you put things into. So you put like a metal pole like up like this, or a steel pole like that. Took a blowtorch to it, did this. The thing didn't fall over, didn't melt. And he went, okay, yeah, you're right. Look, it's not falling over. Watch when I do this. And he just taps it.
And it crumbles.
And it just falls like that. And he went, right, that's the end of your argument. Get a real fucking job. Move on. Like, it structurally weakens it. It may not melt it, but it fucking weakens it. But I've also seen all these now properly done simulations where they've taken the blueprints of the Twin Towers, and I think Building 7 as well, and they run simulations of like actually what would happen if you put in
vibrations and debris hitting.
You can go exactly. You can actually go into them on YouTube and you can see these, and it's like 3D models, and it fucking collapses exactly as it did on the day every single time when they run it down. So basically, the whole 9/11 thing is horseshit. However, to round this back to the abortion topic, because we have to make that the focus here. I mean, the question really is, if your bollocks religious views start to become oppressive to other people, I mean, that is the debate. That really is the debate of the 21st century. I mean, what do we do with these people that believe in all this nonsense?
Ultimately, it has to be by consensus, doesn't it? So, a bit more radical democracy, a few referendums.
Well, in Star Trek, they've got the Prime Directive.
Incoming transmission. Transmit message.
From the moment Starfleet began exploring the cosmos, it quickly became obvious that a set of rules needed to be developed to dictate what a starship captain could and couldn't do when it came to civilizations they encountered. The Prime Directive. When the Charter of the United Federation of Planets was drawn up, General Order 1, or the Prime Directive, was instituted. That order became the most important fundamental principle of the Federation. As written, the primary purpose of the order was to ensure no pre-warp society's natural development was interfered with. Basically, that any planet within exploration boundaries would not be contaminated by contact with Starfleet vessels. A captain, officers, and crew would give up their life rather than violate the Prime Directive. If a civilization was found not to have the ability to leave their own star system, whether that was being confined to only sublight vessels or no space vehicles whatsoever, then contact would be limited to observation only, with crew members having to blend in with the said society, and no suggestion that alien civilizations existed was permitted. The Prime Directive was not only limited to pre-warp societies, however, rather being applicable to all civilizations encountered. What this meant was that any society advanced enough to be spacefaring cultures had full control over their own planets and their surrounding space. For example, a starship commander could not interfere with internal matters of a civilization. If a war was raging between two neighboring cultures, Starfleet vessels could not take sides or dictate what should or could happen on those worlds. This, however well intended, required Starfleet to oftentimes step back and let a civilization either be destroyed or taken over by other powers. Federation membership also guaranteed this fundamental principle. Member worlds were allowed to govern their planets and colonies as they saw fit, and any visiting starship would be subject to that planet's laws while visiting those planets. During the mid-23rd century, the Prime Directive wasn't as enforced as it came to be by the 24th century. At times, Starfleet felt it was necessary to set aside General Order 1 for the greater good, and allowed Starfleet captains in the field to make limited decisions on this law based on their experience. This oftentimes led to major problems occurring, and some captains would view the Prime Directive issues very differently than other captains would. So Starfleet Command and the United Federation of Planets changed this leeway captains had to having any Prime Directive issues the sole responsibility of the Federation Council to debate. Any Starfleet personnel found by the Review Board of the Federation Council to have violated the Prime Directive were immediately placed under arrest and a trial was conducted. The Review Board, however, quickly realized that the Prime Directive could never be black and white, and that the spirit of the Prime Directive was different than that of the rule of the Prime Directive, and as such, justifiable violations of the order were often overlooked. Though at times seemingly cold and heartless, the Prime Directive did prevent humanity from becoming the moral value police of the galaxy, and allowed all worlds within Federation borders to maintain their independence and their sovereignty. In the end, the Prime Directive has done more good than bad.
Link cancelled. Resuming local operations.
That's what I'm always standing by. This is where colonialism, I think, is such an affront to me, because as a Star Trek fan, like, that's the one thing you don't fucking do until you get to a certain point, which we probably define as that concept of liberalism, as in do what you want as long as you don't harm anyone else and with consent.
My argument for instance, complaining about the state of affairs in Northern Ireland or Alabama is that they are hurting people. And therefore, the point at which you have to do something...
But the thing is that, much like in Star Trek, if you were flying by a planet going, well, fuck me, that's a mess down there, that's pretty shit.
Yeah,
in Star Trek, you could send out some tweets to the Federation version of Twitter going, like, have you seen what these fucking arseholes in Rigel 7 are doing? Fucking wank bags. We can do that, right? The problem is if we actually park up the ship and go, right, lads, we're going to have to legislate this.
We're in charge now.
That's the problem.
Klingon.
And that's when to me it becomes a moral problem, because there's stuff that I would actively and passionately disagree with on a lot of religious issues, but I still have to respect your right to believe in that. Because my dad's Christian, for example, and therefore some of his beliefs, because he is a Christian, conflict with this liberal discussion that we know, the beliefs that we all have, right? And it's a really tricky balance to do, because although he's, in my opinion, wrong about a lot of stuff, I have to say, hey, you can do that. That's all right. And I hear him say things. I go, oh man, that's really homophobic and whatever else. But at the same time, it's his religion.
But the longer you listen to this abortion debate, the more you hear this phrase, sanctity of life. You've heard that. Sanctity of life. You believe in it? Personally, I think it's a bunch of shit. Well, life is sacred? Who said so? God? Hey, if you read history, you realize that God is one of the leading causes of death. Has been for thousands of years. Hindus, Muslims, Jews, Christians, all taking turns killing each other because God told them it was a good idea. The sword of God, the blood of the Lamb, vengeance is mine. Millions of dead motherfuckers. Millions of dead motherfuckers, all because they gave the wrong answer to the God question. You believe in God? No. Dead. You believe in God? Yes. You believe in my God? No. Dead. My God has a bigger dick than your God. Thousands of years, and all the best wars, too. The bloodiest, most brutal wars fought, all based on religious hatred, which is fine with me. Hey, anytime a bunch of holy people want to kill each other, I'm a happy guy. But don't be giving me all this shit about the sanctity of life. Even if there were such a thing, I don't think it's something you can blame on God. No, you know where the sanctity of life came from? We made it up. You know why? Because we're alive. Self-interest. Living people have a strong interest in promoting the idea that somehow life is sacred. You don't see Abbott and Costello running around talking about this shit, do you? We're not hearing a whole lot from Mussolini on the subject. What's the latest from JFK? Not a goddamn thing. Because JFK, Mussolini, and Abbott and Costello are fucking dead. They're fucking dead. And dead people give less than a shit about the sanctity of life. Only living people care about it, so the whole thing grows out of a completely biased point of view. It's a self-serving, man-made bullshit story. It's one of these things we tell ourselves so we'll feel noble. Life is sacred. Makes you feel noble. Well, let me ask you this. If everything that ever lived is dead, and everything alive is going to die, where does the sacred part come in? I'm having trouble with that. Because, even with this stuff we preach about the sanctity of life, we don't practice it. We don't practice it. Look at what we kill. Mosquitoes and flies, because they're pests. Lions and tigers, because it's fun. Chickens and pigs, because we're hungry. Pheasants and quails, because it's fun. And we're hungry. And people, we kill people, because they're pests. And it's fun. And you might have noticed something else. The sanctity of life doesn't seem to apply to cancer cells, does it? You rarely see a bumper sticker that says, save the tumors. Or I break for advanced melanoma. Viruses, mold, mildew, maggots, fungus, weeds, E. coli bacteria, the crabs. Nothing sacred about those things. So at best, the sanctity of life is kind of a selective thing. We get to choose which forms of life we feel are sacred, and we get to kill the rest. Pretty neat deal, huh? You know how we got it? We made the whole fucking thing up.
I was 4, and I was sat on my dad's exercise bike that he never used, right? And I asked my dad, is Santa real? And his response fucked me up for life. Because he said, no, he's not, but don't tell anyone because it will spoil the fun for everybody. I then applied that same logic to every known religion. And it took years for me to realise that people actually believed in Jesus. I went along to church and thought this is the same thing as like the Easter Bunny, or it's like the grown-ups version of
No, it was very much
all
the
the kids.
same because I went to a Methodist school and sussed Santa early on because Santa's handwriting was awfully similar to my mum's, that sort of thing. And you kind of, you've sussed that early on, but you think, oh, they seem to be enjoying it, so I won't let on,
I was told not to.
Plus, I thought that the presents might stop.
Oh, yeah.
So, I was far too mercenary to let that happen. So, you just keep stum. But yes, similarly, the religion that we were being taught at school, I remember just sort of classifying in my head, it was up there with fairies and Santa and all the rest of it. And I got into quite a lot of trouble.
Well, when I was, I must have been about 7, I was in Sunday school, and the leader pulled my mum aside and she's like, I'm afraid he's been telling all the other children that God is dead. Which is very on brand for me. But what happened is, I'd asked them, where is God? And they told me that he's in heaven.
Where's heaven?
They've been telling me that when you die, you go to heaven. So I put 2 and 2 together, and I was telling everyone, oh, God's dead, he's in heaven, he must be dead.
Fundamentalist Christianity, fascinating. These people actually believe the world is 12,000 years old. Swear to God. Based on what? I asked them. Well, we looked at all the people in the Bible and we added them up all the way back to Adam and Eve. Their ages, 12,000 years. Well, how fucking scientific. Okay. I didn't know that you'd gone to so much trouble there. That's good. You believe the world's 12,000 years old. That's right. Okay, I got one word to ask you. One word question. Ready? Dinosaur. The world's 12,000 years old and dinosaurs existed, and they existed in that time. You think it would have been mentioned in the fucking Bible at some point. And Jesus and the disciples walked to Nazareth, but the trail was blocked by a giant brontosaurus with a splinter in his paw. And the disciples did run a-shrieking, what a big fucking lizard, Lord. But Jesus was unafraid, and he took the splinter from the brontosaurus' paw, and the big lizard became his friend. And Jesus sent him to Scotland, where he lived in a loch for so many years, inviting thousands of American tourists to bring their fat fucking families and their fat dollar bills. And Scotland did praise the Lord. Thank you, Lord. Thank you, Lord. Thank you, Lord.
There's a certain instinct that some people have to just question everything. I sense that we all have that.
Yes,
absolutely. Well, my parents, one's Protestant, the other's Catholic, so I was doomed from the word go. I'm a mongrel, so when they can't even agree on their own religion, that's going to be a red flag
to
there.
To be fair, my dad was raised Catholic. My mum was brought up Protestant. Neither of them really gave a fuck. They made me go to a Methodist Sunday school, I think, just so they got a morning off from me, because they didn't used to go to that church. They just used to take me to Sunday school, and then I suspect go to the pub. Bastards.
I think I've seen every type of Christian church you could possibly imagine. I've seen the Catholic version, I've seen the Protestant version, all the varieties therein of that, the kind of who's wearing the nicest hats type Protestant church to the very literal interpretation Protestant church. I've been to Ghana and I've seen all the wonderful variants of happy-go-lucky gospel singing versions of Christ to the if we don't all stand up and dance around and make funny noises, the devil will get us version. I've seen everything, and it's all horseshit. And it's a kind of wonderful ride, because you're seeing this same thing going it's almost like going to a comic book convention, but everyone thinks it's real. Like, I'm in like a whole bunch of, I guess, nerd communities that I could count myself amid. You know, I read Batman comics, I like Star Trek, I like pro wrestling. These are some of the weirdest fandoms you could possibly imagine. The upside is we all know these things are made up. Wrestling actively tells you it's fake. So I know what the score is, we all know what the deal is. So we're weirdos, but we're not that weird. But then with religion, it's like all that weirdness, but with it's real. And don't you dare question it thrown in. And that, to me, is when it gets spooky and scary and it really freaks me out, you know.
That's how I feel about the cowspiracy people.
It's just, exactly. When you get people that they're so beyond being reasoned with. And it's exactly the same thing as like your 9/11 conspiracy shit, in the same way that conspiratorial-minded people, they will think, Bush did it. So it's like that, the conclusion bias. So it's like, Bush did it. So I'll find all the facts that lead me to Bush did it and discount 90% of the information that completely disprove that idea. Yeah. And it's the same thing with God. We'll start with that and work backwards, and we'll just take on board all the facts that fit with this particular version of Christianity for this particular Christian God, and we'll fit it all in place. And they just discount everything else. So to come back to your point about, people that question everything, I don't know if it's that we question everything. It's just that how our heads work is that we more take things as they are, we take all the information in, and we come to a conclusion. We don't start with, I quite like that. And then I'll just find things that fit into this emotional reward. And maybe that's because we're all cold-hearted bastards at our core, I don't know. But I'm very non-bullshitty. I can't buy into the warm fuzzy unless it's somehow based in truth. I have to have that fact, truth basis to be able to get any of that emotional kick out of it.
The core for me is that I at no point do I assume that the way things are is necessarily the way they should be or the way they're best done.
Right, so we have to put a button on this then. So abortion. All women should have the right, if they wish to have an abortion, to have an abortion. I think we're all definitely agreed on that.
I think we should just men shouldn't get a vote on it.
Agreed. That's something I think that hopefully
until
in the future.
Until you've all grown wombs, I think, yeah.
What about if it's a woman in a jar?
A womb in a jar? Yeah. I don't know.
What if it's a trans person? So if I was to transition
Don't
to being
complicate matters.
If you choose to identify as a woman, then you'd get a vote.
Okay, there we go.
So that'd be great, actually. If all the anti-abortionists wanted to sway the vote, they'd all have to transition into women. Let's see how fucking committed you are to this.
of me will listen.